I've been asking a question. We started off this little series asking this question. What do you know? I said that I have a bad habit of asking people when I greet them, what do you know? What do you know? And they, eventually somebody bites and they tell you what you know, and you don't want to hear what they know. You just trying to make conversation. But we're asking this question, what do you know? A popular periodical carried a cover story not long ago that asked an interesting question, and the question was this: what does science teach us about God? What does science teach us about God? It went on to say, shift your thinking, okay? It went on to say that science reduces life's mysteries to molecules. But what about the biggest mysteries of all? Have you pondered those? Is the universe a product of design? Is there a designer? And is there a purpose to it? A real purpose to life's endless unfolding? I don't know if you ponder philosophical things like that, but I think they're more than just philosophical. I think they're spiritual questions. Got to answer, especially in our world and age in which all that's being attacked. There was a guy by the name of Edwin Hubble, an astronomer, for whom the Hubble telescope was named after, by the way, who popularized the concept of the Big Bang Theory and how our universe came to be in 1929. He built that theory upon his predecessors that had studied and come to the conclusion that the universe was ever expanding and growing. But then there's another question. Well, how did we get here? How do we get here? Well, there's a lot of answers to that question too, right? Evolution surmises that we evolved from a single-cell organism, which you all probably know better than I do, that study. But even the father of evolution, Charles Darwin, said this, and I quote, "Science as of yet throws no higher light on the essence or origin of life." So the father of evolution even said, science can't figure that out. And ever since Darwin, I want you to note, no documentation, no scientific proof of a life form, even the simplest cell, has been created out of non-living matter. Now, there's some debate on that subject, and there's the whole artificial intelligence thing. I'm not getting into that. I want you to know that my goal today is not really to get into this decades-old scientific debate, but I do want to address a question that I do think is very relevant, that you and I need to be able to give an account for everything which we hold true according to the Scripture. And it's a question that everybody has asked since the beginning of time, and it's simply this: is there a God? Is there a God? Because if there is no God, then that also means some things. It means that there's no absolute truth, that there's no ultimate purpose in life. And if you don't have absolute truth and no ultimate purpose in life, then it really doesn't matter how you behave, does it? I mean, it really doesn't make any difference. It doesn't matter how you treat others. It doesn't matter how you even treat your own body, because there's no accountability. We are part of a generation that is reaping the results of a no-God philosophy. And the result is this: chaos and futility, right? And the only accountability that we now are leaning into in America is that which the courts have to offer. We'll let the courts settle it. That's the accountability we have. Let the courts decide. Now I want you to hear what I'm about to say, because this is an important, I feel like, a very important principle for all of us as Christ followers to be able to deal with. And I really believe this to be true, that the underlying issue of all of life, the underlying issue of our society today, really rests in this idea: is there a God? It is really the issue for which our country is divided over greatly now, if people would be honest. The local news this past week reported as 2021 is going to be a record year for the number of homicides in Lexington, Kentucky. Fayette County's already recorded 32 homicides on the year, double of what it's had in previous years at this point. And the response of the politicians and the powers that be at large has been, and I applaud their nobility in this, has been to, well, we have to address what we've got to do. You know, that's the question that was raised to our mayor and other administrators. What are we going to do about this homicide issue going on in Fayette County? And the answer has come back: well, we've got to address and educate with regard to the gun violence issue. That's the answer. And I'm listening to them trying to grapple anything they can get a hold of to try to, talk about this issue in education and we got to reform some policies and some laws. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, watching this, I wonder how long it's going to take till it finally dawns on all the powers that be in our society that all of our ills of society really are spiritual issues. They really are. I don't know if you've given that any thought. It's having a right worldview, which means having a correct worldview with God, right? Which means that there is ultimate accountability, which means you have a certain value of life as well. It changes your complete perspective as you acknowledge the God of this universe. I said in opening up this series that there are many things that I don't know. There's a few things that I do know. And I know for certain the one that I want to address today, I want to share it with you, and here's what I know. I know that God is our creator. I don't know what you know about that. That's what I know. Our headlines today are swamped with questions that everybody seems to be asking. It's a very popular thing. Lots of TV shows that are legit. I mean, like they're not just fiction. They're written as legit, even though some of them seem to be fictitious. But they're asking this question, is anybody out there? You see this being proposed in a bunch of different ways all the time. Is anybody out there? But I suggest to you that that's not a new thought. It's just that we have new media. The question has actually plagued man since the beginning of the world. Why? Because man instinctively knows. We instinctively know. We're wired this way that there has to be a logical reason for life and that we can determine that. Maybe through knowledge, maybe through science. Man concludes that may be a way we'll figure it out. But with regard to that question, I don't know if you've ever done this. I do this occasionally. It's a good exercise, I think, for your heart and for your mind and for your soul. Have you ever gazed up into the heavens on a real clear night, especially this time of the year, and ever pondered that question? Is anybody out there? Right? I mean, it's hard to almost fathom. I mean, if you really start thinking about what you're looking at, or what you're not looking at, even though you're looking that way. And everything that's going on out there, there's some real pondering questions that loom. I mean, are we living under a designer who designed all this? I mean, is it possible that all this could be accidental like? Is anybody out there? Well, there's been 3 historical responses to that question I want to share with you in brief. There are more answers than this, but 3 basic ones. One is, of course, you've heard all your life, atheism. This is a popular response by those who refuse to acknowledge any accountability to a God, that we are basically orphans in the universe, left to our own demise. Therefore, we must have to do some things if we're going to survive. We've got to save the planet. Or we got to go find a new one, which we have some billionaires right now trying to create the means to go do that. We've watched their flights, right, in recent months. So that's one view of it, in short. Another response to, is anybody out there, is this idea of agnosticism. Now, that's a big fancy word. It really just means somebody who's pretty skeptical, I guess. It's a skeptical response that says, well, we're really not sure. We'll keep looking. Maybe we'll figure it out. Maybe we'll figure it out. The agnostic mind usually is an intelligent person, very intelligent, that is usually so spiritually minded they can't really dismiss God altogether, but they're too proud to submit to the teaching of the Scripture just because a bunch of other fanatics do. So usually an agnostic becomes very impatient with anyone who is very confident that there is a God and He's the only God, because if they, in all their intelligence, can't figure it out, then how are you smart enough to figure it out above them, right? So they're usually pretty skeptical. So that's another response that's been age-old. It's even addressed in Scripture. Some of the letters were written to those people who held those views. The third answer to the question, to anybody out there, is the idea of theism. That is, I believe in a God. But be careful about theism, because you have to ask yourself the question, or keep in mind that there is a variety of theistic views that are not necessarily the God of the Bible. Let me give you some practical examples that you've and remind you of those that you've heard pretty much your whole life. Aristotle, for example, called God the unmoved mover. The Native Americans called him, or it, the Great Spirit. AA says it's higher power. Star Wars calls it the Force. Some scientists call him or her the Energizer. The weather person refers to Mother Nature. Some people call this God the boss, or the man upstairs, or the big guy, or whatever. The point is, what I'm trying to say, the question really isn't for these people, is there a God? The question is which God? Which God are we talking about here? And yet we open up the Bible, God's Word, our authority, and it says, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, I've said to you many times on several occasions, and I still hold it to be true, that if you can get the very first verse of the Bible in your head and in your heart, you'll never have any trouble with the rest of it. If you buy into that, everything else is gravy, right? In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now, there's a lot of reasons why I believe in the God of the Bible. I want to share a couple of those with you. Thought it might be of encouragement and help to you in our age of skepticism. The first is creation itself. Psalm 19:1 says, the heavens declare the glory of God. Again, you ponder, you look up in the sky, are we alone? The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. When you drive up anywhere to a building, you see a building and it presupposes that there was somebody who built it. It just didn't happen. Somebody built that building. We cannot just look at the perfect balance of nature and the complexity of the human body and the uniqueness of various plants and animal species and conclude there isn't a creator or a designer behind this. On the contrary, it says just the opposite. There must be an all-knowing designer behind this, a creator. Romans 1:20 says, for since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature, have been clearly seen by looking around, looking in the mirror. His eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that people are without excuse. So what's your excuse? Or what is an excuse? Young man took his little boy to go visit his mother, which was the little boy's grandmother. She lived on a farm, and so they went to the farm, and most of the farming had gone to the wayside, but his mother, the boy's grandmother, still raised chickens, and so he took his son over to the hen house where there was a small incubator in there waiting for chicks to be hatched. And as they stared into the incubator, they were looking at these eggs, and all of a sudden a chick pecked its way out of the shell. And they stood there for several minutes as this chick pecked its way through the shell. And the dad said, son, isn't that incredible the way that little chick pecks its way out of the shell? And the little boy stared at it and he said, yeah, but what amazes me, Dad, is how did it get in there to begin with? That's kind of how I see things. Psalm 14:1 says this, a fool says in his heart there is no God. A fool. The Bible begins with an assumption. I don't know if you've ever thought about this. It begins with the assumption that you're going to believe in God. It assumes that you're a thinking person. Something can't happen without somebody making it happen, right? So it assumes that you believe in God. You can't have creation without a creator, which brings me to the second reason that I believe in God. That is simply based on our conscience and our instinct, the way that we are created in the image of God. How else could you explain this? This is just a logical question. It has nothing to do even with faith or belief or religion or anything like that. How about could you explain that in every culture, recorded culture, going back to hieroglyphs or whatever languages that have been deciphered and lost and found and, aren't even spoken anymore, every person in every culture that has ever been worships something. Why is that instinct put in every single human being? I believe it's very simple, what I just read to you a while ago, that every human being is born within them a God-shaped vacuum which only God can ultimately fill. There's a restlessness that only God can actually be the satisfier of. That's why Psalm 42:1 reads, with all pun intended, as the deer pants for the streams of water, so my soul pants for you, O God. We're born that way. It's part of our creation of the way we're in the image of God. So that's another reason. But the primary reason that I believe in God is simply because of Jesus Christ. Now hear me on this. Jesus claimed to be God in the flesh. He said, I am from above. If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. For before Abraham was, he said, I am. And when Jesus died and came back from the grave, he proved that his claims were true. It was Jesus that said, have you not read from the beginning how God made them both male and female? Have you not read that? And because Jesus believed that, or said that, I believe it. Because I believe that Jesus is the source of all truth. I don't know what you believe, but that's what I believe. Because here's what I know. No agnostic or atheist has ever come back from the grave, so I'm going to stick with Jesus. What about you? Right. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. I want to ask you a question. I'm going to ask this. I'm going to make a statement, but ask if you agree or disagree with it. Don't do it out loud. Just do it in your head. But I want you to think about this statement. It is the height of bigotry to teach only one view of origin or origins. It's the height of bigotry. It's hypocritical to teach only one view of origins. Do you agree or disagree? Now, I want to give you where that came from. That is a direct quote from a guy by the name of Clarence Darrow, who was the attorney arguing for John Scopes' right to teach evolution in the famous Scopes monkey trial back in the 1920s in the U.S., arguing for the right to teach evolution because up until that time, creation was taught in the public school system. And he said, it is the height of bigotry to teach only one view of origin or origins. Isn't it ironic that 100 years later, we only have one view of origins? And you know what it is? Evolution being taught. It's just a flip onto the other side. I want you to do something with me for a moment. I'm not trying to be I am. I'm being oversimplistic in this, what I'm about to say, but I'm doing it because of time's sake. I'm a student of science. I love it. I read a lot of it. I have a lot of books talking about creation and talking about evolution, and talking about all these things. I've been reading over this for years. I really want you to think about evolution for a moment and its basic premise of how it is set up. And here's what I want you to imagine. I'm just trying to simplify it, okay? Imagine, this is in short, imagine an electrical charge into a massive pile of goo, because I don't know what else to call it, and it becomes, accidentally, because it's been electrically charged, it becomes life, accidentally, okay? Not life like, I'm here. It's life like in something you can't see, a single cell. And that single cell organism grows and begins to swim around in oceans, however they got there, for several millions of years, and that amoeba begins to develop. It develops eyes, it develops scales and fins, and eventually, over time, in adaptation, that fish gets tired of being a fish, and after several million years, it grows legs and a shell, and it crawls up onto the shore. And when it crawls up onto the shore, eventually it wants to go faster, so maybe it grows feathers and wings and becomes a bird. Or then it sheds the feathers and it grows fur and a tail, and it starts climbing trees, and eventually it gets a longer tail, and it starts eating bananas, however they got there, and eventually it decides it wants to stand erect, shave, and curse, and it becomes a man. Now, I know that's an oversimplification. That is where the theory goes. That's it in a nutshell. Now, I want you to think about this for a minute, friends. Given that, and in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, which one takes more faith? Believing in evolution, according to the mathematicians that support evolution, believing in evolution is like believing that you could have an explosion in the woods, and after the explosion, look up and there's a fully formed, functioning library in alphabetical order. Never seen anything like that. Don't have that experience. I want you to be reminded that no matter what people tell you, that no one has ever seen non-living matter become living matter. No one has seen life evolve and step from one species over into another species, although there is some argument over some lizards or whatever. And so to add credibility to this theory, what you have to do is add time, because then it outlasts us all, right? So you add billions of years in order to give the theory credibility. I want to remind you of Romans 1:25. It says, they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, and they worship and serve created things rather than a creator. That's where we find ourselves in our world today. Now, there's a growing number of sincere believers that hold to another theory, and it's called theistic evolution, which sounds like a contradiction of terms, but it's not. They contend that there is a God who created us, but that the creation story can be, it's just a picturesque way of God describing kind of what happened. That God guided the evolutionary process. This is a very popular idea today, by the way. Now, I'm going to be the first one to admit to you with regard to detail, we don't know how the details of creation all worked out. Genesis is vague at best, and maybe it's not all that important eternally speaking, but if you're leaning toward theistic evolution, or if you have thought that way, I want to ask you a couple of questions that I would like for you to answer honestly about this. Number one, do you believe that God used the process of evolution simply because you want your friends to think that you're intellectual, as well as be able to hold on to your faith of being a Christian? In other words, so that science and theology don't contradict. I don't want them to contradict either. I would agree with that. And I don't think they do. I want you to know that if we come here today and we believe together that in something that isn't true, we've all been deceived. Okay? But we need to be very careful that we do not allow a matter of intellectual pride to get in the way of us compromising the God of creation in order to impress other people. So I ask you this question: have you kept alert to both sides of the issue of what is being taught and what you've been taught, or are you just holding on to however you were raised or whatever was put in your head at a young person, and you've closed your mind off to anything else? I want to challenge you to do something that I did this week just as a personal exercise. Go online and Google scientists who are creationists. Known scientists who believe in creation. The list will actually astound you. It's a very prestigious list, beginning with Albert Einstein, by the way. Interesting. Do your homework. Go to the Creation Museum with your family. Read some books on this subject. There's tons of really, really good material for us to educate ourselves and our children and grandchildren on this issue. Here's another question. With regard to theistic evolution, you got to ask yourself, it's just a common question. I've asked people who say that they believe in evolution these questions. These questions, they don't have answers for them, of course, and so they always try to flip it back around. But why are there no transitional forms in major categories of species today? They will always come back and tell me, well, Sammy, that takes millions of years. And I said, or billions of years. And I said, well, we're billions of years ahead from somewhere, if you're right. So why aren't we seeing 8 men today? Why don't we have transition taking place today? Why are there no fossil records showing the transitional forms of one species becoming another species? And why don't we have that being visible to us today in the animal kingdom? Why? I mean, we have dogs and cats. Why don't we have cogs and dats? I don't know. And I'm not trying to be a smart aleck. I'm just saying I think it's a fair question to ask. We ought to be seeing some evidence of that with all the microscopes that we have today, but we're not. Here's another question. This is a big one. I like this one. How do you explain the 3 gaps for which evolution admits they have no answer? There's 3 gaps in evolution that they do not have an answer for. It's the gap between nothing and matter, It's the gap between matter becoming life, matter and life, and the gap between life and human beings. Now, here's the cool part of the Bible. In Genesis chapter 1, there are 3 times that there's a Hebrew word for creation that is used that's never used anywhere else. It's the word bara or bara. It is the word that is used to describe creation and what happened in those 3 gaps. In verse 1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? So you have nothing becoming matter. In verse 21, then we see life coming out of matter when God created all the living creatures and all the things that crawled upon the earth. And then in verse 27, we have the gap closed with the word bara again when he created man in their image, his image. So you have another gap that's filled once again. And the beauty of God's word is that it answers those questions for us. It's a God thing. Only God could do it. Here's my last question. Have you personally really examined the Genesis record carefully and humbly and allowed God's Spirit to teach you? Or are you so tuned out and turned off by fanatical Christians that you can't look at it objectively? I want to do something that I have rarely ever done in a worship service and been doing it for a long time. We're going to have Genesis 1 put on the screen, and I'm not going to ask you to read it out loud. I'm going to read it out loud. You read it along with me, because I just want you to be able to tell Grandma at Thanksgiving you've been reading your Bible. I guess, I don't know. We're going to read it together. Here it goes. Genesis 1, beginning with verse 1. I'm going to go through this quickly, so put on your thinking cap. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was formless and empty, and darkness covered the deep waters, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw the light was good, and then he separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day and the darkness night, and evening passed and morning came, and marking the first day. Then God said, "Let there be space between the waters, to separate the waters from the heavens and from the waters from the earth." And that is what happened. God made this space to separate the waters from the earth from the waters from the heaven. So God called the space sky, and the evening passed and morning came, marking the second day. Then God said, "Let the waters beneath the sky flow together into one place so dry ground may appear," and that is what happened. God called the dry ground land and the waters seas, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the land sprout with vegetation, every sort of seed-bearing plant, and trees that grow seed-bearing fruit. These seeds will then produce the kinds of plants and trees from which they came," and that is what happened. And the land produced vegetation, all sorts of seed-bearing plants and trees with seed-bearing fruit. Their seeds produced plants and trees of the same kind, and God saw that it was good. Evening passed and morning came, marking the third day. Then God said, "Let the lights appear in the sky to separate the day from the night, and let them be signs to mark the seasons, the days, and the years. Let these lights shine in the sky, shine down on the earth," and that is what has happened. Then God made 2 great lights, the larger one to govern the day and the smaller one to govern the night. He also made the stars. So God set these lights in the sky to light the earth, to govern the day and the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. Evening passed and morning came, marking the fourth day. Then God said, "Let the waters swarm with fish and other life, and let the skies be filled with the birds of every kind." So God created the great sea creatures and every living thing that scurries and swarms in the water, and every sort of bird, each producing offspring of its same kind. And God saw that it was good. Then God blessed them, saying, "Be fruitful and multiply. Let the fish of the sea and let the birds multiply on the earth." And evening passed and morning came, marking the fifth day. Then God said, "Let the earth produce every sort of animal, each producing offspring of the same kind, livestock, small animals that scurry along the ground, and wild animals." That is what happened. And God made all sorts of wild animals, livestock, small animals, each able to produce offspring of the same kind, and God saw that it was good. Then God said something else. This is where it gets personal. He said, let us make human beings in our image to be like us. They will reign over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the sky. Then the livestock and all the wild animals on the earth and all the small animals that scurry along the ground. So God created human beings in his own image. In the image of God he created them. Male and female he created them. And then God said, look, I have given you every seed-bearing plant throughout the whole earth, all the fruit of the trees for your food. And I have given every green plant as food for all the wild animals and the birds of the sky and the small animals that scurry along the ground, everything that has life. And that is what happened. And then God looked over all that he had made, and he saw that it was very good. And evening passed and morning came, marking the sixth day. It's good stuff, isn't it? Now listen, I read that, and I know that that's just a handful of verses. And I don't know how God specifically did all that in terms of detail, but I do love that phrase, and God saw that it was good. Have you ever done anything and stood back from it and looked at it and said, that's good? I bet you have. God looked at the earth and all that was in it, and he said, you know what, that's good. And it is good. If you look around at all, you know that that's true. And he looked at all the animals. And he said, that's good. And eventually he looked at man and woman and he said, that's very good. And evening and morning were the sixth day. Now, here's the question I want to propose to you. Why did he do that? Why did he do all this? I get this question every once in a while from somebody who's really bitter about life. They'll look at me and they'll go, I don't understand why God made all this and made us, why we're just puppets or whatever. The Bible teaches in Genesis 1:28 that God created the world for the benefit of man, that we are, according to 1:28, that we're to fill the earth, subdue it, and rule over it. The earth and all of its resources are created for us. Man was the apex of God's creation, and everything else was for our benefit, to provide for our needs and for our enjoyment. We were created for fellowship with God, and that's why he made us living souls. Well, I don't understand why he made us. Why did he make us? Why did he need us? I don't know how to spend enough time in a message to adequately satisfy the answer to that question, but here's a question that I can ask you that might help you understand it. Why did you have children? Been asking yourself that question a lot, haven't you? But I mean, no, seriously. I mean, think about this for a minute. Why have children? Is it because we're sadists? Is it because we're insane? Is it because we want to make puppets out of them and pull all the strings of their lives? Is that why we have children? Well, I mean, we know they're going to, not only are we going to have them, they're going to grow up and talk, and that's when it all starts. And they're going to disappoint us, and they're going to not appreciate us, and they're going to cost us a bunch of money. And not to mention the fact that, you know, it's a tough world. Do we really want to bring kids into this world? And yet we want kids. Why? Why do we want children? That's a good question. I'll tell you why. I know the answer to that because I've experienced it. It's because in a way that's almost inexplicable, they are fulfilling. And they provide an opportunity not only for us to express love, but we enjoy watching them grow and even go through heartache. And then we enjoy, and the most satisfaction we can ever get is when they look back at us and express that they love us. At least sometimes. Tell your parents you love them. It's rewarding. If you can figure out why you had kids, then maybe you can understand why God created the world. That's what I'm trying to say. God created man for fellowship with him, and the closer the fellowship, the more gratifying the life, which is kind of the way it is in our relationship with our kids, right? God created the whole world and the universe to meet man's need. He put minerals in the ground. He put energy and nuclear energy and molecules waiting for us to discover all these things. Like we enjoy watching our kids discover things that we discovered when we were younger, right? He put all kinds of secrets in the universe for us to kind of ponder and think about. And then there are some things that I believe that God just created for our beauty and our sheer enjoyment and pleasure. Why do we have a variety of birds and animals with all the crazy colors and beaks and feathers and stripes and spots? And I think it's for beauty. The psalmist said in Psalm 66:5, come and see what God has done, how awesome his awesome deeds for mankind. It's for us. You know, when we tell people that they're here by accident, you went from goo to you by way of the zoo. When we tell people that, listen, I'm serious about this. When you tell young people this particularly, that's when you have esteem issues. That's when you have insecurities. That's when you have a low feeling of self-worth. You live as if you are an accident. And accidents need to go away. And so we have depression and suicide, and we have self-degradation, and we have abuse. It's no wonder that we have such an identity issue today, where people do nothing but just kind of wallow and perpetuate themselves in self-pity. That's why for me, it's very refreshing to pick up my Bible, the authority of my life, and read right off the bat, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. I'm here to tell you today, He breathed into you life. God knew you when you were being knit together in your mother's womb. And He made you with an eternal purpose, and that is to have fellowship with Him. Psalm 100 says, know the Lord is God. It is He who has made us, and we are His. We are His people, the sheep of His pasture. Enter into His gates with thanksgiving and His courts with praise. Give thanks to Him and praise to His name, for the Lord is good, and His love endures forever. His faithfulness continues through all generations. You want something to hold on to? Hold on to that. I love the old story of a man who was walking through the woods with his grandson, and they were pondering life. The old man was pondering life with his grandson. And he said to his little grandson, he goes, you know, son, in bitterness of his age, he goes, you know, son, it's a pretty messed up world in which we live. And he says, yeah, Grandpa, how's that? He goes, well, he says, for example, look over that pumpkin. I mean, if God really knew what He was doing when He created this world, why did He put that great big pumpkin on that little bitty vine? And the little boy's just kind of looking at him, wondering what he's going. He goes, and look at this big oak tree over here. This huge oak tree has that little bitty acorn on it. See him laying there on the ground? And the little boy looked at him. He said, well, if God knew what He was doing when He created this world, why did He put that little bitty acorn on that great big tree and that great big pumpkin on that little bitty vine? He said, God obviously doesn't know what He was doing. And the little boy didn't know what to say, and then all of a sudden an acorn fell out of the tree and hit the granddad on the head. And the little boy said, I'm sure glad that wasn't a pumpkin, aren't you, Papa? Yeah. I love that story because it reveals an important truth. We think we know more than we do. I just wanted to remind you today that God knew exactly what He was doing when He created every rock, every plant, every animal, and He knew exactly what He was doing when He created you. And you are no accident. You are in His image. You were created to have fellowship with Him, to walk with Him daily, and the closer you walk with Him, the more fulfilling your life will be. What do I know? I'm going to tell you what I know. I know that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and I know that God so loved this world that He gave His only Son that you and I would not perish but have everlasting, eternal life. My question is, what do you know? What do you know, and what do you want to do about it today?